Pues nada, buenas tardes. Espero que sean a todos y a todas bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Diyos maray na tapon tabi sa Gabos. Ako po si Marcos Lanza Concina mula sa Departamento de Lenguas Europeas de la Universidad de Filipinas Diliman. Muna akong pasalamatan Gabos sa inyong pag-attend sa tuyang conference. Pues, vamos al grano. In the first place, what motivates me in making an undergraduate thesis or tinatawag namin na trabaho fin de grado on this missionary text written in the Bikol language are my own roots from Bicol, of course. My family, as well as my illusion na nagilingon yan kang live sa YouTube, hi Eliza, na are from Ilocos, are from Camarines Sur, making this topic something very near and dear to my heart. Secondly, is that I'm aware of the research gaps regarding the current state of missionary linguistics in the Philippines. Because up to this day in our country, there are only a few professors who have shown interest in this field, in particular in this field of missionary linguistics. And one of them being my thesis advisor, sa my director, nung ginagawa ko yung ginigibo ko sa thesis na ito, si Dr. Marlon Sales. And thirdly is the research gap when it comes to the languages already studied. Although an English translation of Padre Marcos de Lisboa's Vocabulario de la Lengua Bicol has been published in 2024 by the late Professor Evelyn Soriano, there remains a scarcity of studies on the missionary linguistics of the Bicol language, as well as other Filipino languages like Maguindanao and Ilocano, in comparison with Tagalog, kasi dun talaga yung padakol na studies. Even though we have missionary texts written in these other Filipino languages. Therefore, I took this opportunity to study the Bicol language in the field of missionary linguistics to bridge this research gap, to bridge this gap of knowledge. All right. Now, with all this said, I'd like to first recognize the colonial roots of missionary linguistics, as missionary texts show a biased perspective on the beliefs of the natives, the Bicol natives. For example, missionary texts like the Vocabulario describe the chief deity of Bicol mythology, like Gugurang as a demon. Likewise, some missionary texts also describe the sexual act as a dishonest act in order to highlight its sinfulness according to the missionaries. But for better or for worse, whether we like it or not, these missionary texts are the same texts that offer us the first systematic and compiled written documentations of Filipino languages. So, in a multilingual country such as ours, it's important to know and value the cultural and linguistic diversity that surrounds us by studying the texts written in Filipino languages by the religious orders. And when it comes to these religious orders, I'd like to give some historical context. In the year 1594, the Real y Supremo Consejo de las Indias divided the Philippines among the religious orders. The Chinese community, the provinces of Pangasinan and of Cagayan were assigned to the Dominicans, Pampanga and Ilocandia to the Augustinians, the Visayas to the Jesuits, and the Bicolandia to the Franciscans. Such distribution of the missionaries allowed them to learn the languages of their respective provinces. As a result, the Franciscans in Bicol introduced Catholic concepts through their missionary texts like El Arte y el Vocabulario de la Lengua Bicol, and of course, El Catecismo del Padre Domingo Martinez.
Sorry, Marcos. I'm sorry to interrupt, Marcos, but your slides aren't moving, so you might have to set it to screen.
All right. There. Is it moving now? There. Is it moving now? Hello.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Difficulties. Anyways. So regarding the author of the study text, what we know of Padre Martinez is that he was a Franciscano descalzo from the Provincia de San Gregorio Magno. He fulfilled various roles over the course of his life, such as being a parish priest of various pueblos in La Bicolandia, as well as in La Laguna, where he died in 1727. He was a chronicler and an author of various works such as the Compendio Histórico de la Provincia de San Gregorio, as well as some biographies of his fellow Franciscans, and of course, El Catecismo. The present Catecismo del Padre Martinez is the version published in the year 1864 and is composed of 64 pages. The first 18 pages are dedicated to prayers like An Amaniamo and Ang Tarakagurang nan Maria. Likewise, the Ten Commandments and the precepts of the Church are included here. Whereas pages 19 to 57 contain the Catechism by questions and answers, and from 57 to 64, a guide to the Mass. And I was able to freely download a copy of this from the Biblioteca Nacional de España Digital. So I highly recommend this website for those who would like to research Spanish bibliographic patrimony, which includes missionary texts written in Filipino languages. As for my research questions, it's composed of a primary question which branches out to 3 sub-questions. Pues, para la pregunta principal, las estrategias traductológicas refer to the choices made in order to achieve the translator's goal of making himself understood. So besides the word sin or kasalan, sala, I've also located other terms belonging to its semantic field because they give it context, as without context, it would make no sense. Para la primera subpregunta, the missionaries employed estrategias lexico-grammaticales by extending the meanings of some Bikol words, baptizing them, so to speak, so that they could better accommodate the doctrinal concepts of the Catholic Church. Para la segunda subpregunta, the missionaries employed Hispanisms in order to avoid confusions with the pre-Christian beliefs of the Bicol natives, as such beliefs were considered by the missionaries to be pagan. The missionaries adopted these Spanish loanwords to the sound of the Bicol language but maintained their Catholic meaning. Y para la tercera subpregunta, the missionaries employed figuras retóricas to provoke the imagination of the converts and to capture the essence of the Christian doctrine of sin that they wanted to describe through the Bicol language. For my theoretical framework, I used Eugene Nida's dynamic and formal equivalence. Although we recognize that this theory was somewhat antiquated, we took into account the fact that the text I studied is of the religious sort, and that this framework is oriented towards the analysis of religious texts, making this the most apt choice for my trabajo fin de grado. Moreover, Nida's framework starts with a source text and a target text. But for the purposes of my study, the process of translation did not have a known source text, which is an innovative characteristic in the operationalization of this framework. After all, the study of translated text with an unknown source text is not completely unheard of, as the possibility of studying such texts exists in both secular and religious fields, such as the study of pseudo-translations in literature and the study of the Q source in biblical studies. Regarding the framework itself, dynamic equivalence, or in Espanol, equivalente dinámica, insists that the reception of the translation in the target language should be similar to the reception in the source language in order to ensure its comprehensibility. Whereas formal equivalence, or in Espanol, correspondencia formal, requires a word-for-word translation that ensures faithfulness naman to the message of the source language. Despite the differences between the two, the negotiation should be balanced between faithfulness to the source language and the comprehensibility of the message in the target language, as they belong to the same spectrum. Regarding la traducción inversa or back translation, I myself translated the fragments written in Bicol in the Catecismo to Spanish, as it was a method which I used in analyzing the text. Moreover, I translated with the help of Padre de Lisboa's vocabulario, as it came from the 19th century, just like the Catecismo. Regarding data collection, as the sample of the study is a digital copy of the Catecismo, I use purposive sampling with the use of digital search tools in order to specifically locate the term sin or kasalan, sala, along with other words belonging to its semantic field, which we will see right now. Right. So moving towards the results of the analysis, although I maintained the categories I established earlier through my research questions, I've observed that mutual exclusivity is impossible, as some words and phrases could be classified under more than one category. I was able to write down 20 tables in my paper, but in the interest of time, I've only selected one representative table for each category. In this first table, one could observe the extension of various words such as kasalan and kagtubos. As the original meaning of sala is jero in Espanol, which means error in the general sense, but it was later extended to mean una cosa vedada o contra la razón, meaning something that is forbidden or against reason. In other words, it came to mean sin in the Catholic sense for its connection with the word pagsolsol, por ejemplo, meaning arrepentimiento or repentance. Moreover, the term kagtubos or paratubos, meaning redentor or redeemer, implied an economic metaphor to express the concept of sin as a debt or utang that only El Señor Jesucristo could redeem us from. Other estateas lexico-grammaticales that we observed in the study were found in the Ten Commandments, the seven capital sins, and the postrimerias, or the four lastings. In the second table, it's observed that the Hispanism infierno is described as a lugar de padecimiento para los condenados, or a place of suffering for the condemned. Likewise, it was introduced to replace the native term gagamban, which was its equivalent in Bikol mythology. Moreover, the Hispanism limbo was described to be un aposento donde los santos estaban puestos en tiempo pasado para esperar por nuestro Redentor, which translates to a place where the saints of the Old Testament waited for their Redeemer. Lastly, the Hispanismo purgatorio was explained through a metallurgic metaphor this time, as it describes purgatory as a paggagamban, or a crucible, or crisol. And the Christian soul as a bulawan or gold, as the Christian soul is something that needed the refinement and purification of purgatory before eventually going to heaven. Right? And other Hispanisms that we've seen in this study include Dios, which was used instead of other deities in the Bicol pantheon, Bicol mythology, like Gugurang. Santos y Angeles were also used instead of terms like Anito, Diwata, and Bathala due to their connection with pre-Christian beliefs, and as well as the concepts of los sacramentos, kasalan na original, las indulgencias, la atrición y la contrición were likewise introduced as Hispanisms. And in this last table, we can observe the introduction of pecados veniales y mortales, or venial and mortal sins, where imagery and metaphors were used to differentiate between these two subcategories of sin. So venial sin was described with the word sadang, which meant una cosa pequeña, or a small thing. But in this context, it was utilized to describe that this type of sin is a transgression that is small. And likewise, it used medical metaphors to describe this type of sin, because it describes sin as it's a type of sin that does not kill the soul, but rather it weakens the soul. On the other hand, mortal sin was described with the word makuri, which in this context is utilized in the sense of something terrible in order to highlight the gravity of this sin. This subcategory of sin is called mortal because it's something that kills the soul and the life of the soul, which is God's grace. Other figuras retóricas we've seen in this study are war metaphors, using the Bicol terms kaiwal and agaw to link the imagery of enemies and combat, physical enemies and physical combat, to the concept of demons, temptation, and this time spiritual combat, spiritual warfare. Likewise, legal metaphors were also used, as Los Santos y Los Ángeles were described in the Catecismo as Los Pintacasi, which meant abogados e intercesores, because they intercede for us sinners, as they are the sinners' advocates before Jesus Christ, who is el Poco, or el Juez de las Almas, the judge of souls. The analysis of the Catecismo shows that the missionaries employed dynamic and formal equivalents jointly as they adapted and extended Bikol words to accommodate the Christian message. They used figures of speech in the Bicol language to make the Catholic teaching understandable to the natives. And they conserved doctrinal terms through Spanish loanwords to avoid confusions with pre-Christian beliefs. The natives of Bicol were introduced to a new spiritual reality, to a religion where the sin of each and every person not only offends their neighbor, but offends God as well. The translation strategies employed in the Catechism allowed the introduction of the Catholic concept of sin to the worldview of the native Bicolanos. In conclusion, the transmission of the Christian doctrine, the conversion of the people, and the transformation of their language were all realized when sin arrived in Bicol. Muchísimas gracias por escuchar. De nuevo, yo soy Marcos Concina. Maray na hapon tabi sa indong gabos. Dios mabalos.